In ancient Persia, during the reign of Ahasuerus, there was a community of Jews living in peace, though they were far from their homeland. Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, ruled over a vast empire that extended from India to Ethiopia. Among the Jews lived a man named Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin, who had been taken from Jerusalem with King Jeconiah by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Mordecai was a just and devout man who cared for his orphaned cousin Hadassah, also known as Esther, Ahasuerus, at a banquet that lasted 180 days, displayed all the wealth of his empire, and after this great event he gave a 7-day banquet for all the people who were in the citadel of Susa. On the last day of the banquet, the king, drunk with wine, ordered Queen Vashti to be brought to his presence to display her beauty to the guests. Vashti, however, refused to come, disobeying the king. Enraged, Ahasuerus consulted his advisors and decided to depose Vashti from her title of queen, decreeing that her position be given to another woman. To find a new queen, Ahasuerus ordered that beautiful virgins from all over the empire be brought to the royal harem, where they would be prepared to appear before him. Among these young women was Esther, Mordecai's cousin. Esther, obeying Mordecai, did not reveal her Jewish origin. She quickly won the favor of Hegai, the eunuch in charge of the harem, receiving the best treatments and advice. When it was Esther's turn to be presented to the king, Ahasuerus was immediately enchanted by her beauty and grace, placing the royal crown on her head and proclaiming her queen in place of Vashti. A great banquet was given in Esther's honor, and the king granted favors to his people. Meanwhile, Mordecai discovered a conspiracy by 2 eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, who planned to assassinate the king. Mordecai revealed the plot to Esther, who in turn informed the king in Mordecai's name. The conspirators were hanged, and Mordecai's deed was recorded in the king's chronicles. In Ahasuerus' court, there was a man named Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, who had been promoted to a high position. All the king's servants bowed and knelt before Haman, but Mordecai refused to do so as he worshipped only God. Haman, enraged by Mordecai's disobedience, learned that he was a Jew and plotted a plan to destroy all the Jews in the empire. Haman convinced King Ahasuerus that the Jews were a scattered and segregated people with different laws and not obeying the king's laws. He offered a large sum of money to the royal treasury for a decree to be issued, ordering the destruction of all Jews in a single day. Ahasuerus, trusting Haman, gave him his signet ring, allowing Haman to write the decree in the king's name and seal it with the ring. The decree was sent to all provinces, ordering that on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, all Jews, young and old, women and children, be killed and their property plundered. The announcement of the decree threw the city of Susa into confusion, while Haman and the king sat down to drink. When Mordecai learned of the decree, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city, crying out loudly and bitterly. He went up to the king's gate, but he could not enter, for no one dressed in sackcloth could enter the king's presence. Esther, hearing of Mordecai's distress, sent clothes for him to wear, but he refused. Then she sent Hathash, one of the king's eunuchs, to find out what was happening. Mordecai explained to Hathash about the decree and asked that Esther intercede with the king for her people. Esther replied that any man or woman who entered the king's presence without being called could be put to death, unless the king extended his golden scepter. Mordecai, however, sent a message to Esther saying that she would not escape by being in the palace, and that if she remained silent, relief and deliverance would come from another place, but she and her father's house would perish. And who knows if she hadn't come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther then asked all the Jews in Susa to fast for her for 3 days and 3 nights, while she and her maids also fasted. After the fast, Esther prepared herself and entered the king's presence. Ahasuerus, seeing her, extended his golden scepter to her, sparing her life, and asked her what her request was, promising to grant it up to half of the kingdom. Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet she would prepare. At the banquet, the king again asked what her desire was. Esther requested that they come to another banquet the next day, where she would then reveal her request. Haman, jubilant at being invited by the queen, left joyfully. But seeing Mordecai at the king's gate, and that he neither rose nor showed fear, he was filled with wrath. Haman, advised by his wife Zeresh and friends, had a gallows 50 cubits high built, planning to ask the king the next morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. That night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep, and asked that the chronicles of the kingdom be read to him. Hearing the reading, he was reminded of Mordecai's heroic act in revealing the plot against his life. The king asked what honor or dignity had been bestowed on Mordecai for this, and was informed that nothing had been done. The next morning, when Haman entered the outer court to request Mordecai's death, the king called him and asked what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor. Haman, thinking the king referred to him, suggested that such a man be dressed in royal robes, mounted on the king's horse, and led through the city with a proclamation of honor. The king ordered Haman to do all this for Mordecai the Jew, who sat at the king's gate. Haman had to obey, leading Mordecai through the streets of Susa, proclaiming, "Thus shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Humiliated and full of hatred, Haman hurried home, mourning to his wife and friends what had happened. At the second banquet, Esther finally revealed her request to the king that her life and the lives of her people be spared, for she and her people had been sold for destruction. The king, enraged, asked who had done such a thing. Esther pointed to Haman, saying, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Ahasuerus, filled with fury, got up and went to the palace garden. Haman, seeing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. When the king returned, he found Haman fallen on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As soon as the king spoke, the eunuchs covered Haman's face. Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Look! The gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman had prepared for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing at Haman's house." The king ordered that Haman be hanged on it. So Haman was hanged on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Ahasuerus gave Haman's house to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Esther again spoke to the king, falling at his feet and weeping, begging him to revoke Haman's evil decree against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, allowing her to rise and present her request. Esther asked that new decrees be sent, allowing the Jews in all provinces to gather and defend themselves against any attack on the appointed day of their destruction. King Ahasuerus permitted Mordecai to write in the king's name and seal with the royal ring. Thus, letters were sent throughout the empire, giving the Jews the right to defend themselves and destroy their enemies. When the day arrived, the Jews gathered and prevailed over their adversaries. In Susa, they killed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. The king asked Queen Esther what else she desired, and she requested that the bodies of Haman's sons be hanged and that the Jews in Susa be allowed to continue defending themselves for another day. The next day, the Jews in Susa killed 300 more men, while in other parts of the empire, 75,000 of their enemies were defeated. They did not lay hands on the plunder, showing that their fight was not for material gain, but for survival. The days of fighting and victory were followed by celebration and joy. Mordecai established that the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar be celebrated annually as the festival of Purim, a time of feasting, gift-giving, and helping the poor in memory of the deliverance God had given his people. Mordecai became great in the king's house, respected and esteemed by his countrymen, working for the welfare of his people and promoting peace for all his descendants. Esther, for her part, remained the beloved queen, whose courage and faith brought salvation to her people. Thus ends the story of Esther and Mordecai, a narrative of faith, courage, and divine providence, showing that even in times of exile and danger, God doesn't abandon his people and can raise up deliverers in times of need. Thank you very much for watching our video about the incredible story of Esther and Mordecai. We hope you found inspiration and knowledge in this journey through biblical history. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. If you liked the video, leave a like and share it with your friends. Your participation is essential for us to continue bringing more fascinating and revealing stories. See you next time, and may divine wisdom always illuminate your path.